Daniel, is that you? Where are you?
This is my true story. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 52 years old, and I buried my only son 20 years ago. Every single Sunday since then, I've stood at his grave. Rain, snow, or burning sun. It didn't matter. I went, because that cold marble headstone was the only place I could still talk to him. The only place where I could pretend he was listening. His phone number stayed in my contacts all these years. I know that sounds insane. I know people probably thought I was losing my mind keeping a dead boy's number saved in my phone like he might text me back someday. But deleting it felt like losing him twice. Like erasing the last piece of evidence that he ever existed. That he was ever mine. But last month, at 2:19 in the morning, my phone rang. And his name lit up the screen. Daniel Parker. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was having a heart attack right there in my bed. I stared at that screen, at his name glowing in the darkness, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't do anything but stare. I answered. My voice came out as barely a whisper. Daniel? And a voice on the other end said, Mom, you need to stop digging. The line went dead. My hands went cold, ice cold, because Daniel was buried with that phone. I put it in his casket myself. I remember the weight of it in my palm, remember tucking it into his jacket pocket, because I couldn't stand the thought of him being alone down there in the dark without something familiar, without something that connected him to me. So tell me how the hell his phone called me from 6 feet under the ground. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to do something for me. I need you to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you might change how you see death. It might change how you see everything. And I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know someone out there believes me. Let me take you back 20 years. Back to the day I buried my son. It was October. The leaves were turning that deep, angry red, the kind that looks like the trees are bleeding. The sky was gray. Not stormy, just gray. Flat. Empty. Like God himself had looked away. There were maybe 30 people at the funeral. Family. A few of Daniel's friends from high school. Some neighbors who felt obligated to show up. Everyone was crying. Everyone except me. I stood there at the edge of that open grave, staring down at the casket, and I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. Like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me human. My ex-husband stood on the other side of the grave. He wouldn't look at me. Couldn't. We'd already been separated when it happened, and after Daniel died, he never spoke his name again. Not once. It was like our son had become a ghost twice over. Dead to the world, and dead to his own father. But not to me. Never to me. I started visiting the grave every Sunday. I'd bring blue lilies because those were his favorite. I'd sit on the grass and I'd talk to him. I'd tell him about my week. About the weather. About stupid things like what I had for dinner or what show I was watching. Because if I stopped talking to him, then he was really gone. And I couldn't accept that. I refused to accept that. I kept paying his phone bill too. Every single month for 20 years. $147 for a number that shouldn't exist. For a phone that should have been rotted and rusted and destroyed by now. Buried under 6 feet of dirt and decay. People told me I needed to move on. They said I was torturing myself. They said Daniel would want me to be happy, to live my life, to let him go. But they didn't understand. You don't let go of your child. You don't move on from the person you grew inside your body, the person you held in your arms, the person whose first word was mama. You don't just file that away like it's a finished chapter in a book. If you've ever lost someone and couldn't move on, you'll understand this. You'll understand that grief isn't something that fades. It's something that becomes a part of you. It's a weight you carry, and some days it's heavier than others, but it never goes away. Never. I thought the dead only spoke through dreams. I was wrong.
So, let me tell you about that night.
The night everything changed.
It was a Tuesday. Nothing special about it.
I'd gone to bed early because I had work the next morning. I remember setting my phone on the nightstand, plugging it in to charge. I remember turning off the lamp and pulling the covers up to my chin because my bedroom gets cold at night. I was almost asleep when I felt it. That vibration against the wood of the nightstand. That buzz, buzz, buzz that cuts through silence like a knife. I opened my eyes. The room was dark except for the glow from my phone screen. And that glow was lighting up the ceiling, casting shadows that looked like hands reaching for me. I reached over and grabbed the phone. And when I saw the name on the screen, I stopped breathing. Daniel Parker. Calling. Not a text. Not a notification. A call. An active, incoming call from a phone that had been buried 20 years ago. From a number that the phone company told me had been disconnected in 2006. My thumb hovered over the answer button. My entire body was shaking. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, could feel my pulse in my throat. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room. Part of me wanted to scream. But a bigger part of me, the part that was still a mother, needed to answer. So I did. I pressed the button and brought the phone to my ear. Daniel? Static. Crackling. Like the connection was coming from somewhere far away. Somewhere it shouldn't be able to reach. And then, through all that noise, I heard a voice.
Faint.
Shaking.
Distant.
Mom, you need to stop digging. And then silence. The line went dead. I sat there in my bed, holding that phone against my ear like if I kept it there long enough, he'd come back. He'd say something else. He'd explain what the hell was happening. But there was nothing. Just dead air. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing. If this happened to you, would you answer again? Would you pick up if the dead called you back? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know I'm not insane. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I couldn't. I just sat there replaying the words over and over in my head. Stop digging. What did that mean? I wasn't digging. I wasn't doing anything except surviving. Except visiting his grave and keeping his memory alive. But those words burrowed into my brain like parasites. They wouldn't leave. And the more I thought about them, the more they terrified me, because his voice sounded scared. The next morning, I checked my phone. I don't know what I expected to see. Part of me thought maybe I dreamed it. Maybe grief had finally driven me over the edge, and my brain was manufacturing things that weren't real. But there it was, in my call history.
Clear as day.
Daniel Parker. Incoming call. 2:19 a.m. duration. 14 seconds. I stared at that screen until my eyes burned. I took a screenshot. I showed it to my coworker later that day, and she looked at me like I'd lost my mind. She asked if someone was pranking me, if maybe someone had gotten access to his old number somehow. But that didn't make sense. The number had been disconnected. The phone company had confirmed it years ago when I called to cancel the service after he died. So I did what any mother would do. I drove to the cemetery. It was early morning, barely past sunrise. The air was cold and damp, and mist was rising from the ground like the earth itself was breathing. I walked through those rows of graves like I'd done 1,000 times before, my feet knowing the path by muscle memory. When I got to Daniel's grave, I stopped. The soil around his headstone looked freshly disturbed. Not by a lot, but enough that I could tell someone or something had been there. The grass was torn up in places. There were small indentations in the dirt, like someone had been kneeling there.
Digging.
My chest tightened. My hands clenched into fists. Who the hell had been at my son's grave? I called the cemetery office as soon as they opened. I demanded to know if they'd done any maintenance work on that plot. If they'd been digging there for any reason. The woman on the phone sounded confused. She checked the records. She said no one had touched that grave in years. Nothing had been scheduled. Nothing had been disturbed. But I'd seen it with my own eyes. So I called the phone company next. I told them about the call. I gave them the number, the exact time, everything. And after putting me on hold for what felt like an eternity, the representative came back on the line. "Ma'am," she said, her voice careful, like she was talking to someone fragile. "That line was disconnected in 2006. It's been inactive for almost 20 years. There's no way it could have placed a call." "But it did," I said. My voice was shaking. Angry. "It's right here in my call history. I can send you a screenshot. I can prove it." "I understand this is frustrating," she said. "But our system shows that number has been inactive since the disconnection date. If you received a call from it, it didn't come from our network." "So how did it call me?" "Tell me that." How does a phone that's been buried for 20 years, disconnected from every network, placed inside a sealed casket 6 feet underground, place a call? Have you ever heard from someone who shouldn't be alive? Have you ever gotten a message from the other side? Because I need to know I'm not the only one this has happened to. We've all seen strange things in our lives, things we can't explain. But none of those things compare to this. I became obsessed. I'll admit that. I spent every waking hour trying to figure out what was happening. I pulled up old records from the accident. I contacted the funeral home. I even hired a private investigator because I needed answers and no one was giving them to me. The investigator traced the call. He said it had pinged off a cell tower near an old cabin about 40 miles outside the city. A cabin my family used to own. I hadn't been there in over 20 years. Not since before Daniel died. We'd used it as a vacation spot when he was younger, a place to get away from the city and just be together as a family. But after the separation, my ex got the cabin in the settlement, and I'd never gone back. But apparently someone had. I drove out there on a Saturday morning. The road leading up to the cabin was overgrown, barely visible through the trees. The gate at the entrance was rusted, the chain holding it closed covered in moss and decay. I parked my car and walked the rest of the way. My heart was pounding. My hands were sweating despite the cold. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to go home, to forget this ever happened. But I couldn't. Because if there was even the smallest chance that my son was somehow trying to reach me, I had to know. I had to understand. The cabin looked abandoned. The windows were covered in dust and grime. The porch was sagging. Leaves had piled up against the door like nature was trying to swallow the whole structure. But when I pushed the door open, something felt wrong. It felt alive. The air inside was cold, but not the kind of cold that comes from being empty. It was the kind of cold that makes your breath fog. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes your skin prickle. I stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under my feet. Dust hung in the air, thick and heavy. Everything was covered in a layer of neglect. Except the kitchen table. There was a coffee mug sitting on it. And when I reached out to touch it, it was still warm. My blood turned to ice. I looked around the room, my eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. "Hello." My voice echoed back at me. "Is someone here?" No answer. But then I saw it. On the wall, a photograph in a frame. It was Daniel, from when he was about 8 years old. He was smiling at the camera, gap-toothed and sunburned, holding up a fish he'd caught. I knew that photo. I'd taken it myself on one of our trips to this cabin, but I'd never given a copy to anyone. The original was in an album at my house. So, how was it here? My hands were trembling as I walked closer to the photo, and that's when I saw the phone sitting on the table beneath it. A cell phone.
Old.
Cracked screen. The same model Daniel had been buried with. I reached out and picked it up. It was cold in my hand.
Dead.
Or at least it should have been. But when I turned it over, the screen lit up, and the name displayed said, Daniel Parker.
Subscribe. Please.
Because what I saw next still haunts me every single night. I stared at that phone like it was a live grenade. Part of me wanted to throw it across the room. Part of me wanted to smash it against the wall until it was nothing but pieces. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, watching that screen glow in my hands. And then it rang. The sound cut through the silence like a scream. I almost dropped it, almost ran out of that cabin and never looked back. But I didn't. I answered. I brought the phone to my ear and I whispered, Daniel? Static again. Louder this time. Angrier. Like the signal was fighting to get through from somewhere it shouldn't be able to reach. And then his voice came through, distorted and broken but undeniably his. Mom, stop digging. It's not me down there. The line went dead. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the floor of that cabin, the phone still clutched in my hand, and I sobbed. I sobbed like I hadn't sobbed since the day they lowered his casket into the ground. Because what the hell did that mean? It's not me down there. If it wasn't him in that grave, then who did I bury? Who have I been visiting every Sunday for 20 years? Who have I been talking to, crying over, pouring my heart out to? And if it wasn't him, then where is he? If you lost someone and had one more call with them, what would you ask? What would you need to know? Tell me in the comments, because I'm drowning here and I need help. I left that cabin in a daze. I don't even remember driving home. My mind was racing, spinning, trying to make sense of something that made no sense. When I got back to my house, I pulled out every document I had from the accident. The police report, the coroner's report, the death certificate, everything. And I read them, really read them. For the first time in 20 years, I forced myself to look at the details I'd been too broken to face back then. Daniel had died in a car accident, a head-on collision with a drunk driver on a rural highway. The car had caught fire. The bodies had been badly burned. Identification had been made based on a wallet found at the scene. Daniel's wallet. His driver's license inside. But there had been no DNA testing. No fingerprint analysis. No dental records compared. Because back then, in that small county, those things weren't standard procedure for what seemed like an open and shut case. They had a wallet. They had a body approximately the right age and build. That was enough. But what if it wasn't? What if they'd made a mistake? I contacted the coroner, who'd worked the case. It took me 3 days to track him down. He was retired now, living in Florida, probably trying to forget all the death he'd seen in his career. When I finally got him on the phone, I explained who I was. I told him about Daniel, about the accident, about the body that had been identified as my son. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I remember that case, he finally said. His voice was quiet, heavy. There were 2 vehicles involved, 2 fatalities. The identification process was rushed. It was a small office. We didn't have the resources we have now. 2 fatalities?
I said. My voice was shaking.
I only knew about one. About Daniel. The other victim was in the vehicle that caused the accident, he said.
Male.
Early 20s. Pronounced dead at the scene. But the fire, it made visual identification nearly impossible for both bodies. So, how did you know which one was which? I demanded. Anger was rising in my chest now, hot and sharp. How did you know you gave me the right body? Another pause. The wallet, he said quietly. That's what we based the identification on. Your son's wallet was found near one of the bodies. So we assumed. You assumed?
My voice was rising now.
I was shouting. 20 years of grief and pain and rage were erupting out of me. You assumed and you never checked? You never tested? You never made sure? Ma'am, I understand you're upset. Upset. I was screaming now. You let me bury someone who might not have been my son. You let me grieve for 20 years over a stranger's body while my actual child might still be out there. I hung up on him. I couldn't listen anymore. I couldn't breathe. Some say it was fate. Others say something darker was at play. But I needed to know the truth. I went back to the cemetery. This time with purpose. This time with rage burning in my veins. I found the groundskeeper, and I demanded to see the burial records. I demanded to know everything about the other victim from that accident. The other body. At first, he refused. But I didn't care about protocol or privacy or any of that bureaucratic nonsense. I pushed. I threatened. I made such a scene that eventually he gave in just to get me to leave. The other victim had been buried in the same cemetery, just 3 rows over from Daniel's grave. His name was Marcus Webb, 22 years old. No family claimed him. A pauper's burial. No headstone. Just a flat marker with his name and dates. I stood over that grave, and I felt sick. Physically sick. Because what if the bodies had been switched? What if I'd been grieving over Marcus Webb's remains while my son? I couldn't finish the thought. I hired a lawyer. I filed a petition for exhumation and DNA testing. It took months of fighting, of court appearances, of arguing with officials who didn't want to disturb 2-decade-old graves. But eventually they agreed. They exhumed the body from Daniel's grave on a cold morning in March. I wasn't allowed to be there. They said it would be too traumatic, too disturbing. Like anything could be more disturbing than what I'd already been through. The DNA results came back 3 weeks later. The body I'd buried was not my son. It was Marcus Webb. For 20 years, I'd been visiting the wrong grave, talking to the wrong person, pouring my heart out to a stranger. And somewhere out there, my son. I collapsed when I got the news. I couldn't stand.
Couldn't think.
Couldn't process what this meant. If Daniel hadn't died in that accident, where had he been for 20 years? Why hadn't he come home? Why hadn't he contacted me? Unless he had. Stop digging. Those were his words. His warning.
But why?
What was he hiding from? The investigator I'd hired dug deeper. He searched for any records of a Daniel Parker who'd survived past 2005. Any trace of him using his social security number, his birth certificate, anything. And he found something. A man matching Daniel's description had resurfaced 6 years ago under a new identity. New name. New life. He was living in Oregon, working as a construction foreman, married with 2 kids. The investigator showed me a photo. It was him. Older. Different hair. A beard. But his eyes, those were Daniel's eyes. I'd know them anywhere. I stared at that photo until it blurred through my tears.
My son was alive.
He'd been alive this entire time. And he'd never come home. He'd let me believe he was dead. Let me grieve. Let me destroy myself with sorrow while he built a whole new life without me. The rage I felt in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was white-hot and all-consuming. It burned through every other emotion until there was nothing left but fury. I wanted answers. No, I deserved answers. I booked a flight to Oregon that same day. But before I could leave, my phone rang one more time. Daniel's number. Again. I answered, and this time I didn't whisper. I didn't hold back. "You're alive," I said. My voice was cold. Hard. "You've been alive this whole time, and you let me think you were dead. You let me suffer. You let me break myself into pieces over a grave that was never even yours." Silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "Mom." "Don't you dare," I hissed. "Don't you dare call me that. You lost the right to call me that when you disappeared. When you let me bury a stranger and call him my son. I didn't have a choice." His voice was shaking now.
Desperate.
"You don't understand. If I'd come home, they would have found me. They would have killed me. Killed you." "Who?" I demanded. "Who are you talking about?" "The people I owed money to. The people I was running from when the accident happened." He was talking faster now, words tumbling over each other. "It wasn't drunk driving. They ran me off the road. They tried to kill me. And when the fire happened, when they thought I was dead, I had a chance. A chance to disappear. To be free. So, you just left me?" My voice cracked. "You just let me think my only child was dead, so you could save yourself?" "I was protecting you," he shouted. "If they knew you were still looking for me, if they thought you knew I was alive, they would have used you to get to me. I couldn't let that happen." Tears were streaming down my face now. Angry tears. Bitter tears. "You're a coward," I said. "You're a selfish, cowardly bastard, and I wish to God you had died in that accident. At least then I could have grieved you properly. At least then I wouldn't have wasted 20 years of my life mourning someone who didn't even have the decency to tell me he was alive." "Mom, please. Stop calling me that," I screamed. "I'm not your mother anymore. You made that choice. You made that decision when you chose to protect yourself instead of trusting me. Instead of giving me the truth." I hung up before he could respond. And then I deleted his contact. Finally. After 20 years, I erased Daniel Parker from my phone. But deleting a number doesn't delete the pain. It doesn't erase the betrayal. It doesn't heal the wound that's been bleeding inside me since the day I thought I lost him, and has only gotten worse now that I know he was never really gone. He just didn't want to be found. Not by me. Not by the woman who gave him life. I never went to Oregon. I canceled the flight. Because, what would be the point? What could he possibly say that would make this better? That would make 20 years of grief and suffering worth it? Some things are better left buried. That's what he told me, isn't it? Stop digging. Because he knew if I kept searching, I'd find the truth. And the truth was worse than thinking he was dead. The truth was that he was alive, and he chose to stay away. He chose to let me suffer. That's the cruelest thing a child can do to a parent. Not dying, but living and choosing not to come home. I still visit the cemetery sometimes. Not every Sunday anymore. Just when the weight gets too heavy and I need somewhere to put it down. But I don't go to the grave I used to visit. I go to Marcus Webb's flat marker, the one 3 rows over. And I apologize to him. I tell him I'm sorry for the life he didn't get to live. I'm sorry his death was mixed up with my son's life. I'm sorry no one mourned him the way I mourned the person I thought was Daniel. Because everyone deserves to be mourned. Everyone deserves to have someone remember them. Even strangers. As for Daniel, I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if he's still in Oregon, still living under that fake name, still playing house with a family that doesn't know who he really is. And honestly, I don't care anymore. He's dead to me now. Really dead. In the way that matters most. But sometimes, late at night, my phone will ring. And for just a second, before I look at the screen, my heart stops. Because part of me still hopes.
Part of me still wants it to be him.
Calling to apologize. Calling to explain. Calling to tell me he's sorry, and he wants to come home. But it never is. It's always just a spam call. A telemarketer. A wrong number. The dead don't call back twice. At least, not the ones who matter. There was one more call, though. One last time. It was 3 months after I learned the truth. 3 months of therapy and medication and trying to rebuild a life that grief had hollowed out. My phone rang at 2:19 a.m., the exact same time as the first call. I didn't recognize the number. It said unknown. I should have ignored it. Should have turned my phone off and gone back to sleep. But you know me by now. You know I can't leave things alone. I answered.
Static. Crackling.
That same distant sound, like the call was coming from somewhere between worlds. And then, Mom, please. Stop digging. Some things are better buried. It was his voice, but different.
Hollow.
Empty. Like it was coming from something that used to be Daniel, but wasn't anymore. Leave me alone, I whispered. Just leave me alone. I'm sorry, the voice said. I'm so sorry. And then, for the last time, the line went dead. I blocked the number. But it didn't matter. He never called again. I used to think grief was silence. The absence of a voice you'll never hear again. The empty space where someone used to be. But it's not. Grief is an echo. It's a sound that bounces back at you when you least expect it. It's a voice that calls from the past, from the places you thought you'd left behind, and it demands to be heard whether you're ready or not. And sometimes that echo is louder than the original sound ever was. If you ever get a call from the past, think twice before you pick up, because sometimes the dead have things to say that you're better off not hearing. Sometimes the truth is crueler than the lie. And sometimes closure means never getting the answers you spent years desperately searching for. Subscribe before the next story finds you. Because not every call is meant to be answered. And not every ghost wants to be found. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing me when no one else would. Thank you for sitting with me in this pain, in this anger, in this horrible, beautiful mess of what it means to be a mother who lost her son twice. Once to death, and once to life. I don't know which one hurts more. But I know I'll carry both wounds until the day I die. And maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe that's the price of love. The cost of caring so deeply that when it's ripped away, it takes pieces of you with it that you can never get back. Or maybe I'm just a mother who made mistakes, who held on too tight, who couldn't let go even when letting go was the only way to survive. I don't have the answers. I don't know what's right or wrong anymore. I just know I'm tired. So tired. And I wish, more than anything, that phone had never rung that night. I wish I'd stayed in the dark. In the grief that was simple and clean and didn't come with betrayal attached to it. But wishes don't matter. They never have. The only thing that matters is the truth. And the truth is this. My son is alive somewhere in this world, and he doesn't want to be found. He made that choice. He chose his new life over his old one. Over me. And I have to live with that. We all have to live with the choices other people make. Even when those choices break us. Even when they leave us shattered and bleeding and wondering how we're supposed to keep breathing when every breath feels like swallowing glass. That's the real horror story. Not the impossible phone call. Not the grave that held the wrong body. It's the realization that the person you loved most in this world looked at you and decided you weren't worth staying for. That you weren't worth the risk. That protecting himself was more important than protecting the heart of the woman who gave him life. That's what haunts me. Not the calls. Not the mystery. The rejection. the abandonment, the knowledge that I meant so little that he could just leave. So, if you're watching this and you have someone in your life who loves you, a mother, a father, a child, please don't do what Daniel did. Don't disappear. Don't let them grieve you while you're still alive, because that kind of betrayal doesn't heal. It just festers. And eventually, it kills whatever love was there to begin with. I don't love my son anymore. I don't even know if I ever really did. Maybe I just loved the idea of him. The version of him I created in my head. The perfect child who died too young and never got the chance to disappoint me. But the real Daniel? The one who's alive and hiding and building a life without me? I don't know him. And I don't want to. So that's my story. That's the truth I promised you at the beginning. My son was buried 20 years ago. But last month, I learned he was never really dead. He just didn't want me to find him. And that somehow hurts more than any funeral ever could. Thank you for listening. And I'm sorry if this wasn't the ending you wanted. But it's the ending I got. And we don't always get the endings we deserve. Sometimes we just get the endings we can survive. This is mine.